That would probably be more. Well, it's not very. I have the same problem.
We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. If everyone will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then please remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Mathey?
Here.
Alderman Sage?
Here.
Alderman Mwambwe?
Here.
Alderman Burgess? Here. Alderman Painter?
Here.
Alderman Schmidt?
Here.
Alderman Black?
Here.
Alderman Hellman?
Here.
Alderman Bray? Mayor Renner?
Here. Thank you very much. And we're going to go ahead and start with recognitions and proclamations, and just as a notation for the record and for people in the audience, the appointments used to be recognized at the meeting in which they were approved, which did seem a little bit odd because they hadn't really been approved yet. So Mr. Gleason and I thought it was a good idea to recognize people at the next meeting. Speaking of which, the first person we recognize is Mr. Gleason, who is being appointed to the Central Illinois Regional Broadband, CIRBN, not CIRA, excuse me. And then Angie McLaughlin, through a separate process, to the John M. Scott Health Commission. Well, we know Mr. Gleason is here. Is Angie McLaughlin here? Okay. If we could give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for being willing to serve. And now we move to public comment. Again, public comments, if you want to get reactions from the City Council and you want to engage in dialogue, we have a Mayor's Open House on Friday from 4:30 to 5:30 before every regular City Council meeting, so it's kind of like a town hall meeting every other week. And I want to thank Alderwoman Karen Schmidt for handling it this past Friday. But it certainly gives you the opportunity to get instant answers and to engage in dialogue, and anything is okay, anything is on the table. But public comment is for an opportunity for the public to come to speak to the council for up to 3 minutes on any subject, and there is no back and forth. So we start out with Bruce Meeks, then Gary Lambert, and Scott Steinle. So Mr. Meeks, Lambert, and then Steinle. Mr. Meeks? Oh, there he is. Sorry.
Good evening. The lack of trust of some of the local officials, I don't think is diminished yet. So I'm advocating for more clarity, accountability, visibility, and yes, transparency for what is next for Bloomington as it relates to the 2004 enacted local motor fuel tax to help build that trust, rebuild that trust. In the beginning, the mantra was by elected officials that the tax revenue earmarked for roads. Yet the ordinance says transportation infrastructure projects. I think that's too broad. I think it needs to be very specific. Roads, aggregate, asphalt, machinery that only works with asphalt. That matches as advertised to the citizens by many of the elected officials. Clarity. Complete reporting of the monies from 2004 till now. And of course, the details of where the money went. I'm not accusing anybody of any wrongdoing. I think it might help you, for those of you that support doubling that gas tax. What I'm advocating for fiscal 1920 forward is that we set up a motor fuel tax enterprise fund. Let that sit in for a little bit. We have water, sewer, those are infrastructure. Oh yeah, streets, part of the infrastructure. That the surplus for this fiscal year 18-19 be put in that new enterprise fund for roads. With this enterprise fund change, the ordinance needs to be clear on the roads and define what that means. That a moratorium, you could even do it tonight when you do the vote on the moratorium for the gambling machines. A moratorium on no raising of the gas tax. Won't happen, but could happen. Mandatory review of the local motor fuel tax, the state, federal, and other taxes are added to the burden of those that use the motor fuel tax. Lower rate or sunset the ordinance. I remember one elected official and one city manager I talked to in the fishbowl said they never heard of sunsetting an ordinance or sunsetting a tax. I can show them a few ordinances in this country. These next items are related to no increase in motor fuel tax. An increase in taxes will hurt the middle income residents the most. Raising the tax will likely encourage more non-road related spending. Raising the gas tax will not solve the still existing problem of the structural deficit. A gas hike will increase the price of consumer goods. Tax hikes are a negative impact on economic growth. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Lambert and then Steinle.
Good evening. Got a letter to the editor of the Panagraph that was in last Thursday's paper. It was written by Sadie Brommer. It says, taxes for streets, not entertainment. Just read the Bloomington city manager suggested adding more city taxes to fuel to pay for the horrible road conditions. I probably should cool down before writing this. When will we get wise and stop this taxing and still have unacceptable streets? Let the tax dollars being funneled into the BCPA, the Grosinger Motors Arena, and the Creativity Center be stopped, and use those tax dollars to repair our streets. To me, this all started back in the early fall of 2013 when we issued the $10 million road fund that ended up being used over a period of time, 3-4 years. And I think the length of the bond was 10 years, I'm not sure. But it's like buying a car that's going to wear out in 4 years and you're getting a 10-year mortgage on it. Since that time, we have had a never-ending increase in taxes, fees, new taxes. We just had the one suggested last time for 4% and said, oh, we can put that into the general fund and use for something else. That is the problem. Since that 2013, when the city stopped funding the roads, the general fund has been used as a slush fund for preferential projects. Last week, it's still in the budget, we got $500,000 in there for the arena, for the lighting. We've got more pension spiking that we were told was going to be taken care of once the city of Springfield took care of it. Time's about up. Got a short quotation here from Friedrich Nietzsche. Sometimes People don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Steinle.
Yes, my concern is regarding the streets that I keep bringing up. With the rain that we had recently, the water would come rushing down Fleetwood Drive. I know, Terry, you know where that's at. And it flooded the streets. I've been after the city to put double drains in. They'll say, we'll raise the drains when we relay the street. When we relay the street, when you're going to relay the street, Jim? And he doesn't have an answer. And to me, that's plain, you know, you're not getting an answer, Terry. You just aren't. You know, it'd be no different than if somebody had asked you a question and you would say, when we get around to it. Well, that's not good enough. The city keeps raising taxes. They're going to, as Gary said, they were raised the motor fuel tax. They're never satisfied. They keep adding all these taxes to utility bills. And, you know, the streets keep going to pot. And, you know, to be quite honest, people are sick and tired of it. Maybe the city needs to start learning to live within their means. The streets, when we had that high wind storm, I believe it was Saturday, the tree limbs came crashing down onto the street. That's harder on the roads too. You know, it makes me wonder when people are going to stop and say enough is enough. You've got this use tax, and you know, it gets through Springfield, and then it gets back to the city, and the city says, "Oh, by gum, we'll send them a bill." I just paid a use tax, and I got another bill from the city. That makes a lot of sense, Terry. It really does. Like the Bloomington normal use tax. Why don't they just say, it's just take the cities and merge them to begin with? And we would need one city manager, one deputy city manager, one mayor, one city council. But I guess it's stepping on somebody's toes, isn't it? I think I've said all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We move right along to our consent agenda. Are there any items that any members of the City Council would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Alderwoman Howman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Painter. Any further discussion? Sorry. The voting should be ready there. Okay. The motion carries 9-0. There are no nays to announce, Madam Clerk. We move right along to our regular agenda, and item 8A, presentation of classified non-union IMRF retirements as requested by the Human Resources Department. And this is, again, for information purposes only, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our city manager, who has a brief presentation and then a brief council possible discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. In accordance with the Local Government Wage Increase Transparency Act, the city has its 4th, 5th, and 6th triggering event with 3 employee retirements. All our non-represented classified employees in the Illinois Municipal Retirement System, IMRF, and have expressed their intent to retire from the city. If there's specific questions, we do have Josh with HR that's here to take questions if necessary.
So just to be clear, this is what is required of us for information to make this open and transparent by law.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions then from the City Council? Comments? Okay. Seeing none, we move then right along to item 8B. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody have a... Oh, okay. Yeah, that was information. 8B, presentation of the fiscal year 2020 proposed budget as requested by the administration and finance departments. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Gleason. And we've got about a 20-minute presentation and then 20 minutes or so council discussion. Mr. Gleason.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I'm going to take the first couple of minutes of the presentation just to sort of take the steps that we've taken in the preparation of the FY20 budget. We've had two public discussions in the January Committee of the Whole meeting, and then also in the February Committee of the Whole meeting. Have had elected meetings in preparation of the 2020 proposed budget. The timetable is something that Scott Rathbun, the Finance Director, will share with everybody. It's the same timeline that we've talked about in the past. I guess the thing that I'd like to share more so for the community is just to reiterate what the process has been. The budget itself, as we've become aware in the monthly finance director's report, it's shaping up well enough. We also took the opportunity as staff at my direction to look internally. You know, not just to be satisfied that the current budget, the FY19 budget, is shaping up a little bit better than maybe we anticipated this time last year. So it was an opportunity to look internally. And in fact, we've had three smaller reorganizations, two smaller, one coming up next month that we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's saved ongoing revenue to the city. And then just other things that we've looked at internally is why we're only seeing about a 1.5% spike increase in the budget for FY20 proposed compared to what we saw or are in FY19. And I actually think that is due in large part to staff taking the direction of council to look internally, not just place the burden of our budget and expect that the taxpayers can accept increases in the different tax revenues that we have. So we've done that, and I think in large part that's again why we see only a 1.5% increase in our budget compared to last year. The one thing also, when we look at our budget and we see what the budget can afford, there are obviously some things that are just outside of what our current budget and the future budgets are going to be able to pay for. And it's council's direction of me to look at the possibilities that we have. And it was very clear when we explored the menu of opportunities on new revenue that I would, what I would classify as new revenue that would pay for capital projects that need an ongoing revenue stream, stuff that the budget won't cover. And we looked at that menu of options, and it was very clear that many were not even up for consideration by this council. But there were two areas that we thought that there might be an opportunity, and that's an increase in the locomotive fuel tax. Not a proposal on anybody's part. It's just if we're going to do more, the revenue would have to come from somewhere. But you've made it very clear that this would have to be dedicated to very specific types of projects, not just in this case, lost in the larger pot of road revenues that there might be some uncertainty in where this money is being spent. So with that said, in my past experience, I do have experience with sunsetting certain types of revenues, and that could be a decision before council as we discuss the possibility of a locomotive fuel tax increase from 4 cents to 8 cents. But the one thing for sure that is going to occur is that we are going to show in many different ways, the projects, in FY20, what we're doing, how we're using the taxpayer dollars. That's something that this council has made it very clear is very important, that you want the community to be as certain as they possibly can that we're not wasting their funds. So if we do increase this 4 cents, that would be about $2.3 million in new revenue. It would be dedicated to certain types of asphalt and concrete projects, yet to be decided by this council. but we'll have stages, photos of the stages of the projects, and even signage at the project site so that we can do our best to show the community how this money is being spent. Another area that is a possibility, again on that menu of options, was video gaming terminals. We currently have no fee associated with the terminal. And this is a separate discussion from the moratorium that's going to be coming up tonight. I mean, whether we consider a fee, we have 250-ish terminals that are in the city now. And if the decision of the council is to increase slightly or cap forever, that's a separate discussion that I know that's coming. But this money, how, if we charged $500 times our $250 terminals, that would be about $125,000 of ongoing revenue. Not a lot to necessarily build a $10 million aquatics park as an ongoing revenue stream, but it would provide an ongoing revenue stream when we talk about very general things like economic development. But again, something that this council would have to decide, city manager, this is how I expect this money to be used. But we have that opportunity as well in the downtown, other special projects that would require an ongoing revenue stream. So these fall into the category very clearly that are above and beyond what our current budget and future budgets can likely afford. So the process was directing me to look at possible revenue streams. I've done that. This council's been very clear on what is off the table and what is on the table for possible consideration. The locomotor fuel tax and the video gaming terminal fees, while not adopted, obviously not approved by this council yet, is not in the proposed budget that we will see tonight. Instead, it's going to come forward most likely as a separate agenda item since it's two different items on the March 25th council meeting. Then is when council will make the decision yes or no to both the locomotor fuel tax increase and the video gaming terminal fee. And if approved, that would be attached to the final adoption of the FY20 budget. So one would flow into the other, but it's not attached to the proposed budget tonight. Just felt that there was that clarity that should be made, not so much to this council, but more so to the community, that if this does occur, guaranteed we will show the community how this money is being spent, because we're stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and I know none of you take that lightly at all. Scott, where are you at? Come on up. Going to walk through a proposed budget that's very similar to the committee of the whole discussions that we had in January and February, but it's a step towards final adoption, which we'll see in April. Scott?
Thank you, City Manager. As Tim said, this presentation is almost an exact match of last week's. We will be going through each of the exhibits again, though. I realize, we have an additional probably presence in the audience. I wasn't here for last week's presentation. As I mentioned last week, this budget presentation is a comparison of FY19 versus FY20 and the significant changes. Citywide, we have a $221.6 million balanced budget. That's a very sizable increase of $11.5 million. I'm going to direct your attention, I'm going to skip down to this capital projects line. You can see that we're at $39.1 million in capital projects budgeted for the year. That's an increase of $12.5 million. So almost all of our increase related to FY19 to FY20 citywide came from this increase in capital projects. A significant portion of that was water, sewer, and the motor fuel tax funds. Significant projects in those. The general fund balanced at almost $106 million. It was balanced with a combination of increased revenues. We're seeing a good trend in revenues this year. We recognized our vacancy savings, a historical trend in our vacancy savings, so we included that trend in this year's budget. And good expense control, and some changes that occurred in our health insurance, and our IMRF rate went down, so we had some pretty good savings in the benefits. That is driving a projected fund balance of plus $20 million. Now, of course, that's going to depend on how we finish 2019. Right now, we're projecting around a $1.5, $1.6 million surplus. We're very pleased about that, but we're still going to end up in $20 million to $19 million in fund balance. A 15% goal for that would be more around the $15 to $16 million range, so we're doing very well with that. A material change for this year, trying to trend away from the use of the capital lease for our equipment purchases. We implemented that change last year in the water fund. This year we rolled it through the rest of the enterprise funds except for storm, which has some fund balance challenges. Even solid waste, we utilize part of the fund balance for solid waste to go towards cash for equipment, trying to maintain a good fund balance there. But the general fund, a $500,000 in cash for equipment versus using the capital equipment lease. So we whittle away, wean ourselves off that capital equipment lease, save interest, and really highlight that expense every year. Tim?
This last item on this slide shows an external entity reduction. The city funds different economic development and marketing strategies within the community. For this year only in FY20, we've considered reducing two of the funded entities, which would provide us $200,000. And we see that as reallocation and can direct that towards our economic development efforts. I mentioned earlier the reorganizations that have occurred. The third one, and this will actually be an ordinance that comes before council for a code change, is standing up our very own economic development department. Currently, we have an economic development officer that's within the community development department of the city, but see an opportunity to place a higher focus on our economic development challenges that we have in the community and opportunities. I think that it will lend itself well to us being a stronger partner with our regional partners in the town of Normal and the different entities that do economic development. And this is $200,000 at least in the FY20 budget that would be directed to that department. Thanks, Scott.
Primary focus of these presentations is trying to have some consistency with the monthly finance report presentation that we're doing. So starting off with the major tax revenues, and then we'll walk through the income statement for the general fund and the citywide fund. I'm just going to highlight a couple here that may get your attention. The property tax levy, we have an increase over prior year of $645,000. Most will recall that we increased the levy, not the rate, but the levy amount by around $273,000. The remainder of that is increase in expectations for the Empire Street TIF of $370,000. Home rule sales tax has been trending very favorably this year, so we have a $500,000 increase there. Utility tax, wanted to highlight this decrease is primarily due to telecom trends. Telecom utility tax has been coming down a couple $100,000 a year since the increase was implemented around in 2015 to 2016. I wanted to highlight the local use tax, assumed due to the internet sales tax. We are currently $200,000 ahead of budget in FY19 through January. So this is one line item where I'm feeling very good about that we may, we're going to stick with that proposed budget to be conservative, but my hope is that with the internet sales tax, we're going to be well above that next year. General fund detail. As I mentioned, general fund was balanced, increased revenues, expenses held down, benefits. With IMRF, I'm having trouble with that tonight, and the health insurance decrease, the recognition of our vacancy trends, historical vacancy trends, and still being able to use $500,000 in cash for equipment. I wanted to go through on this revenue screen just this use of fund balance very briefly. This is not general fund, budgetary fund balance. These are restricted dollars. The BCPA, $775,000, that's dedicated to working on the Creativity Center's roof and HVAC system. Those were funds that were donated in prior years. And then $300,000 of utility pension reserve. I just wanted to run through that real briefly. Our contribution for public safety pensions is around $11.1 million. Our levy is approximately $8.2 million for public safety pensions. We have approximately $2.6 million in utility tax related to the increase from prior years. That leaves a shortfall for the pension contributions of $300,000. So we had built up a reserve related to that utility tax increase over the last few years. It's $5 million plus. We're beginning to use that this year, $300,000. That need is going to increase over the next few years. We're going to probably run through that reserve by 2022, 2023 approximately. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify a couple things. So that is money that 5 years ago was passed and earmarked for pensions, and there were some extra money, and now we're dipping into that reserve.
Yes, that utility tax increase resulted in about $2.5 million a year.
Right.
So initially, none of that was needed, so it built up a reserve. That's how we ended up there.
Right. And then just to clarify, the Creativity Center, there are no public dollars for the Creativity Center.
All donated dollars.
Right. So there's nothing to reallocate.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And we refer to budgetary fund balance, which for the general fund is $19.2 million. Those reserves are not included in that fund balance. Those are restricted dollars, so they're not included when we publicize the budgetary fund balance. General fund expenses. Benefits, IMRF, and in health insurance. That's a significant decrease over the prior year. Other intergovernmental expense, this is where our public safety pensions are posted. So you can see a $347,000 increase, approximately 2.3% there. This reduction in capital improvement transfers, this does not mean we did not do capital improvements this year. We just had a fund balance build up from prior year in the capital improvement fund, so we were able to lower the transfer for this year. Moving on to the citywide. Citywide, the budget's balanced, as I mentioned, $39.1 million in capital improvements. You can see a lot of that is reflected in this use of fund balance. Went up from $17.2 million to $21.3 million. That's a $4 million increase. And it's all due to projects and motor fuel tax and water where we're using fund balance. Intergovernmental revenue, $7.5 million increase related to Locust Colton CSO project. I made a note here. These are, it's kind of the Fed version of motor fuel tax for public works, the STP program. These are federal funds that are administered by the state that we're eligible for these projects. So it's a revenue source. Expenses. Sticking with the capital project theme, wanted to point out the capital expenditures here went up from $28.8 million to $43 million. That's a $14.2 million increase. 12.5 of that for capital projects, and then also for the equipment purchases that we're expensing. So I've been throwing that number out, the $39.1 million in capital projects, trying to emphasize where the city's putting the taxpayer dollars to use. In the interest of that, we're going to run through the capital project list briefly. Same list as last week. There's an addition of Wittenberg Woods Park walking path here. You can see we're trying to address in the first 1, 2, 3, 4 categories our facility needs, trying not to let those get behind schedule. That's almost $865,000 in facility improvements. Here you can see $5 million for streets, alley, and sidewalks. It's commonly known that we raised $2.3 million in local motor fuel tax, $2.3 million in sales tax. The remainder of that is $400,000 in fund balance in the capital improvement fund that had rolled forward from prior years. We restrict any roll forward in the capital improvement fund by classification. So if for streets and alleys and sidewalks, and if it rolls forward, it still stays restricted for that category. Enterprise funds, just running through the totals, nearly $11 million for water projects, $4.4 million for sewer, $1.7 million for storm. Enterprise funds continued. We do have arena improvements. These are compliance issues. They're out of compliance from the code, fire codes, from my understanding. The safety issue with the arena arc flash, that's a study needs to be executed. The lighting improvements, these are illumination, egress, paths that need to be illuminated we're out of compliance with. And then motor fuel tax, nearly $14 million. And then the police fire range lodge building repurpose. And those are drug enforcement funds. An additional exhibit for this week that I included was a fund balance. This is a snapshot of a larger exhibit from the budget book that has more activity in it. Looking at it before the presentation tonight, I realized that if you're looking at this, you may try to cross-foot this. This exhibit does not work that way. You cannot start with the 4/30/2019 fund balance and then net the budget and then get to the 4/30/20. So I just want to highlight this. This is more informational. If we could just kind of put the budget out to the right for now, I wanted to show you the fund balance trajectory, and we can talk about why there's a delta there. For the general fund, $19.2 million at the end of 4/30/18. We're projecting a 1.5, 1.6 surplus for the year, so that's how you get to the 20.8. We're utilizing we're at a balanced budget this year, so the fund balance for 2020 is the same number, 20.8. Water, you can see the significant decrease between the projected for 2019 of $25.2 million down to $16.6 for the end of 2020. That's the use of fund balance for all those projects. Sewer, slight decrease. Stormwater, we actually had a negative fund balance at the end of last year. Took great care in working the budget out, so we start beefing that fund balance back up. I'd mentioned that for storm, we couldn't use cash for equipment for that fund because we're still dealing with kind of a deficit in that fund balance. Solid waste, $1.5 million projected for 2019, down to $1.2 million for 2020. That's that use of fund balance for equipment purchases. We still wanted to maintain that fund balance, so in that 10 to 15 range. You can see we're shooting for 16% for solid waste. Abraham Lincoln parking garage. The general fund actually has to subsidize that, but that lease is expiring in a couple of years, so that fund's going to correct itself in a couple of years. And I wanted to highlight this debt service fund. Also, when you see total here, this is not a foot of this. This is just a total of all our debt service funds, all our bond funds. And we fund those a year in advance, so that's why the fund balance is 101%. We had some slight variations in our activity there, but we fund those a year in advance of the next cycle, so that's why that's 100% fund balance. And that ends the proposed budget presentation. The entire proposed budget, the 2 volumes, will be available via the web beginning tomorrow at that address, and hard copy in a week at the city library or city clerk's office. There's been a lot of questions about where things are being posted. This presentation will be posted to the city's website, Documents, Finance, Budget, FY 2020. And also, you can find it, smiling, I'll have a comment during the Finance Director's presentation too. You can find the documents on the calendar link as well, on the details, all the documents of presentation. Remaining FY 2020 budget schedule. Tim, did I skip you coming in here? No. Okay, we're good. Proposed budget public hearing, March 11th. That notification will be going out in the pantograph in the next few days here, with the final budget adoption on April 8th.
Questions, comments from the council? Alderwoman Schmidt.
I just want to clarify the numbers that you read out for the under our capital projects. You had 2.3 local motor fuel tax, which we've been hearing. That's the 4 cents, and has that been pretty steady?
Yes.
Okay, so there's not really too much given that. And then you had 2.2 in our quarter penny sales tax, and that has also been pretty steady?
Yes, and that's the one that's trending up somewhat for home, because that's based on home rule.
And you also noted the upward trend in local use tax, which is not, I'm assuming, doesn't fall into the sales tax bin.
No, it does not. That's just part of the general fund revenues.
And not potentially earmarked for anything at this point.
At this point, no.
And you mentioned, I was taking notes pretty fast here. I think you said 400,000 out of the general fund. That was a
No, that
get
was
us up to about 5,000.
5 million.
5 million. Sorry, don't I wish?
Right. So the capital improvement fund, for the coming year's budget, we do transfers based on the budget into that fund. And so if those projects are not executed or they come in under budget, those funds remain there in the capital improvement fund. So we had, it's 360, but we have to round for the purposes of the presentation,
Sure.
about $400,000 in unused funds from prior years related to streets, sidewalks, and alleys. So the money was in there. We didn't move any more money from the general fund into it. So that was fund balance in the capital improvement fund dedicated to streets, sidewalks, and alleys. So that's how we got up to the $500,000.
Okay,
Or
thank
5
you
million, excuse me.
for clarifying that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. Alderman Black.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Tim. Just a couple of things. First off, I want to thank Tim and the department heads for this budget process that we've been going through. I think it's done a really good job of explaining to the public, what we're trying to accomplish, where the monies might be going, and I think this simplified way is not a data dump where it can be a lot of information for people to get confused, and I think keeping it at this high level has been very helpful. And Tim, I want to particularly compliment you and your candid conversations with the council on ways that you want to do these projects. Some people might talk about a wave pool. How will you fund that? And pushing that question on us, and I think that it forces us to think about this budget as a policy choice. And I can't help but think about the conversation we had 5 years ago about the funding for the police and fire pensions, about the policy implications of funding it through the utility tax, and the policy implications of us not taking action tonight on whether it be local motor fuel tax. If we don't fund that, then we have to answer to people for not having adequate funds to fix the roads. If we don't fund our capital projects appropriately, are we going to be bonding that out and be in debt for some period of time? So or do we go back to the public and say we don't want to do these capital projects, and that has implications as well. So I see a couple council candidates in the audience. I know some are probably watching. That these are the things that I like to hear from people who are coming up, because these are the problems that we're going to have to tackle into the next budget cycle. Because I'm particularly concerned about the dwindling funding through the utility tax for the police and fire pensions. That's something that I thought would be either further off in the future or not happening at all. So I know we talked about it briefly, and then kudos to Tim on that for telling us about it, because we made a decision at that point in time not to wrap that into property taxes, and that's going to have some reverberations from now through the next 10, 15, 20 plus years. I guess my question for Tim is more of a process one. We talked about the $200,000 we're going to be reallocating for economic development, and that's coming from a couple different entities, including the CVB. Are we going to be inviting Crystal or any of the other organizations that are going to be impacted by that budget choice to come talk a little bit about what that decrease in funding is going to mean for their organization?
I'll do whatever council wants. Maybe they tie that into an annual reporting to council.
Yeah.
I have had discussions with both of those entities. They were involved in the process, and we're told that this was just a one-time consideration. But to your specific question, if that's the wish of the council, we could do that at a committee of the whole meeting.
Yeah. I always like to have the facts on what that looks like. $125,000 from the Convention and Visitors Bureau is not a small amount, and I want to know from Crystal, kind of in public and on the record, what that impact to her organization might be, and then the other ones as well.
And just as a quick reminder, the funded entities that we had talked about was the EDC. We fund at $100,000 along with McLean County and the town of Normal. I realize that the EDC is sort of in flux with trying to find an executive director, but the thought was to keep that funding level the same with the other partners for the EDC. The CVB, town of Normal, funds at $109,000, and we fund at $475,000. And of that 200 that was listed, we proposed a $125,000 reduction. So 475 down to 350,000, still 3 times as much as the town of Normal. And it was a conversation with Crystal. That entity is well run, where they've got 5-year contracts out with IHSA and what I'll call reserves, and that's really not the proper way to call it, but that funding level for all of those contracted years is covered. So if we were to do this, this seemed like the time to do this. And then the last one is the Be an Advantage initiative, and Town of Normal does not fund the Be an Advantage. We have been at 125,000. Well, we were at 125,000 this year, and then as we're seeing what the results are, the return on investment with Be an Advantage. Didn't want to abandon that completely, but took 75,000 from the $125,000 contribution down to 50. Still allows for some workplace development opportunities and some marketing, which was more than covered that portion as we enter our FY20, and that's how we come up with the 200,000.
Thank you. And just one more piece to give you kudos for is I know that we've saved a couple $1,000s by not printing out the budget books. It's about time, and I know we'll have a few out there for those who don't want to use the internet, or that's okay. But I can tell you that in my years, I must have a small forest of budget books that I don't use because I can look online, which is fantastic, and the transparency. Yes, great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, on this side, excuse me. Alderman Milwaukee, I did notice yours first, and then Alderman Sage.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to say thank you to both Tim and Scott, and I'm sure there are countless other staff members who participated in putting together this budget. I very much appreciated the way it's been laid out. I think it's a lot simpler, easier for the average person to understand. And I also appreciate an approach that seems to emphasize that we have some strategic choices to make. Okay, and in how we address some of our issues, and some of them will be opportunities that we do need to explore. For example, in the area of economic development. So I definitely appreciate that, and we do have some thinking to do. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that in terms of the possibility of an increase in the motor fuel tax, I think it would serve us well to, as we discuss that next time, to share the history of our spending in terms of roads, because I do remember that in the past we had years that was even prior to me being on council where we only spent about $500,000 on road resurfacing 1 year.
1 year zero.
Right, and 1 year zero as well. So I think it'd be really helpful to have that history, but to also lay out where some of those funds were expended, different road projects, resurfacing, as well as pavement preservation. I think that would also be very helpful. And I think, generally, I I would I know the science behind the potholes can be very challenging. um, but I think it would be helpful just to have a general conversation. I don't want to suggest another commission, like a pothole commission or anything like that. But I think it would be very helpful to kind of talk about how we approach that in the future. Because one thing that's always bothered me is the fact that, any given year we can spend $5 million, but I think the public is still going to see the next year, because of where we live, given the weather, the freeze and thaw cycles and everything like that, the public will see every year in February lots of potholes, and the assumption would be that, work is not getting done, but in fact it's just the nature where we live. So how do we bring all of that together so that we and the public are on the same page, in terms of our expectations and how we manage them, I think will be extremely helpful. So,
yeah. Thank you. I think those are excellent points, Alderman Malombo. In fact, I'd like to echo those. But also, the one other thing, excuse me, that sometimes people don't understand is that some of our major arteries are owned by the state of Illinois, like, Route 9, Main Street, Veterans Parkway, and so just, obviously it's just an explanation for what situation we face. And proposed solutions are always really welcome, right?
and I should add, because of travel soccer, I've been traveling quite a bit, around the state and other places, and I see the same thing everywhere. So it can't just be Bloomington, I see that on the highway. I see it in many different communities who share similarities with us in terms of weather. So that's something to think about.
Thank you. Alderman Sage.
Thank you. And thanks, Scott. I know this is always a busy time for finance. So maybe just a couple of comments, maybe a question. I know that different places in the budget, you've indicated where there are donated funds or state grants or something like that to kind of perhaps depict a more accurate picture of what the actual cost to the city might or might not be. So maybe the ask for consideration would be on the Fox Creek Road project. That I think that's shown at $7.5 million, but I think about $2 million of that is actually a state grant, if you will, or an Illinois Commerce Commission grant from their Grade Crossing Safety Fund. So perhaps if we can just indicate that, maybe the next time we see that, just for
Certainly.
for informational purposes.
Okay.
Because it's a big number, obviously.
Big number. Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Scott, let me and again, maybe not an answer tonight, but the next time we come back and talk about this, is there, I guess I'm just trying to understand, what is the budgetary approach going to be, and maybe it's in an MRO section, maintenance, repair, or operational type of thing, but maybe some idea of what we intend to be doing with O'Neill, the existing O'Neill pool, and that operation over there, because I'll specifically ask about that next time. So maybe if we can just add some additional, information in the next presentation
Sure.
that we have.
Okay.
And then I want to make sure that I understood something that you shared early on in the presentation. In our unreserved balance fund, we have by policy, I think that's 15%. And could you share the numbers with me again of what the 15%, the ordinance amount is, and then what's actually in the fund right now? Did I hear you say it was, perhaps around 15 million is what we need in there?
Yeah, 15% of total expenditures.
Right.
Is the typical math.
So maybe again for the next time that we come back and look at this again, I guess some type of line item or some comment somewhere in the presentation or if you just want to send that to me or send it to the council, however you want to do it. But we're clearly running, we're clearly running in excess, I believe, in our unreserved fund above and beyond our ordinance amount, aren't we?
Yes, we finished 2018 at 19.2 million.
Sure.
And then during the year, the fund balance gets eaten down because we have that 2-month lag in tax receipts.
Right.
But
And I
projection
mean,
is still
yeah, the unreserved balance fund is a good plan. That's a good policy that was adopted by the council. And I know at the time we were talking about it, and even in subsequent conversations, and I'll highlight this in a moment. I know one of the comments that we talked about was we have that fund so that if God forbid we would ever see something like a Washington, Illinois,
Right.
we would have that money to draw from in those those truly critical, unbudgeted, unplanned, almost catastrophic events. But I'm more interested in the specific numbers between what does the ordinance require in the unreserved fund, and then what have those balance totals been running the last, let's say the last 2 or 3 years in there. Okay, so thanks again, Scott.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that Alderman Sage raises a good point, we've been increasing because essentially we have, at least every year I've been mayor, and I think at least a couple years before that, we've come under budget. So no matter, the money may have been allocated by the council, but that doesn't mean that the city of Bloomington has spent it. So we've had anywhere from several $100,000 to a couple $1 million a year that has helped us build that fund balance back up. I guess if you go back a decade, there was a point where it was close to nothing, but now we're, in good shape. But I think Alderman Sage raises a great point. Alderman Mathian, next.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. I think everybody said that a good job this is and how much easier this is to understand. One of the things I was curious about for next time when we look over this is if we, Tim, you had mentioned that departments had areas where they had cut their budgets and everything so we could come in at this level. I'm just wondering if you could give us a list of examples for next time of where those cuts were. I know that in the last year, almost everybody that's up here has had ideas of, could we look at this? What about this? All these different places we talked about, changing how we handle healthcare and stuff. But there's a bunch of other places I know everybody has made suggestions on, and I wondered if we could get like a high-level list of what those, places were by department so we could look at those. Thank you.
Hey,
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
a couple of quick comments.
Absolutely.
To some of the comments, O'Neill Pool, and this can be a part of a larger discussion, obviously, but for season 2019. I believe that we just received the thumbs up from the state of Illinois to open with the very minimal repairs to that pool. Do not think that it's going to get us into 2020 with the same approach. And I think the discussion that council's had in the past, presented by Parks, Jay Tetzloff, you're somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 million for that aquatics park. I've asked and curious, knowing that 2020 is going to be here on a blink of an eye, and want to know what does this look like? Where can we find a way to improve the pool and get the green light from the state to open it to serve our community? But knowing that may be unlikely to get 10 or 12 million dollars towards this project. So what does it look like? And that number is somewhere in the range of $6 million. Jay and I have a telephone conference that's being arranged to speak to the developer, the architect, of what the plan was. Is there any way for us to trim that $6 million? Maybe I don't improve a parking lot. Maybe I don't improve the concession stand and the showers and maybe the pool itself. As long as it would lend itself, or investing in that phase of the project doesn't impact negatively other phases if they were to come. What is that dollar amount? And I don't know that yet. But to your point, that's something that we're working on. As far as locomotive fuel tax and the possibility of video gaming terminal fees, definitely we'll have a presentation prepared for the Committee of the Whole meeting on March 18th. It's a perfect opportunity before that comes to council the week later on March 25th. And if I'm hearing council, the direction, we'll walk through historically where we've been, where we've spent asphalt and concrete dollars. But then also, if I'm being directed to sort of transition into what staff recommendations are, if we were to receive new revenue, I can do that as well. So we'll be prepared for a presentation on March 18th at the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Cleason. Thank you.
And I would, excuse me, I would just say I appreciate that proactive approach, particularly around O'Neill Pool, Tim, because I know that's always the way you approach things, is to try and be out in front of that. So thanks again for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Sage. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Rathman. Thank you, Mr. Gleason. Thank you to all the staff, Billy, and others who've been involved in this budget process. And all our department heads who are in the back. Thanks for your help, and thanks for all you do every day. At this point, we move to item 8C, and this is not for information only. This is a consideration of an ordinance that amends Chapter 7 of the City Code to extend the moratorium on video gaming licenses within the city to April 9th, 2019, as requested by a City Council initiative. At this point, we'll start out with Alderwoman Bray. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Venner. Following our discussions in regards to how to handle this moratorium.
Oh, excuse me. Actually, did you have a presentation first? I apologize, Alderwoman Bray. I just looked down and realized that Tim was supposed to be first.
We'll do this real quick. Last meeting, we had discussion about the moratorium that's in place that absent any action would go away on March 1st of this year in a couple of weeks. Discussion was extending the moratorium because there were several comments, questions, concerns that council expressed and directed staff to prepare a presentation. We probably do that turnaround in short order, but it's a tight window, and thought that we could be prepared to cover some of the comments, concerns, questions March 11th, hold March 18th as a backup if there were additional questions, and then be prepared potentially on April 8th. So that would have been what I was saying regarding agenda item C. We know that there's going to be further discussion, but I knocked that out just because I should. So
okay.
I'm going to turn it back
thank
over
you
to you.
for that. And then just the April 9th is the day after the council meeting. So now, Alderwoman Ray, again, my apologies.
Thank you, Mayor Renner. So as mentioned, the discussions from our last Committee of the Whole in relation to some question raised by Alderman Painter caused us to pause and think about how we could approach this moratorium, which would expire March the 1st. And then we also thought, well, what is the next iteration? So as we talked through and thought through that very aggressive timeline, and we think about some other things that are happening statewide in regards to, for instance, the legalization of cannabis, perhaps, how that might interplay or affect gaming terminals, we don't know. So with all these unknowns, I think there's an appetite, at least I have an appetite, to make a motion to amend this ordinance as presented and extend the moratorium until September the 1st, giving us an opportunity to have additional conversations and do some study about some of the other things in play, not only here in the community, but statewide. So I have a motion to amend this particular proposed ordinance from April the 9th to September the 1st.
Okay. So if I'm to understand, you are making a motion, because we don't have a motion on the floor, so you're making a motion to amend the proposed motion to go from April 9th to September 1st of this year to extend the moratorium so that we can do even further analysis based on several other things that the state might do, et cetera. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
correct?
To do our due diligence and have an understanding of what this means in our community, not just for this year, but for years to come.
Okay.
And so that's my motion.
Okay. And before we go any further, is there a second to that motion?
Well, I'll second it because the state is also considering legalizing sports gambling. And I'd like to know if our new governor is going to meaningfully look at all gambling in Illinois and maybe even the playing field for everybody in that regard. I think that these are things that we all need to consider moving forward. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion and a second, and now questions, comments. I'm going to start with Alderman Black. Well, he's the only one light on. He's the first one I saw. Alderman Black, and I got your name right this time.
Thank you. I guess a couple of process questions first for Tim. So if this motion were, maybe this is a question for Jeff, if this motion were to fail, would we revert to the motion that is on the agenda, or would this conversation be over?
I think you'd be able to go back and move
Gotcha.
And could, just hypothetically, if I could on that, let's just say, if this motion were to pass, it passes. If it doesn't pass, it could revert to this motion, but it could be another date.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because essentially we're still talking about this. It's listed on the agenda. Thank you. I'm sorry,
Okay,
Alderman
yeah.
Black.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that clarification, because you never know. It might just disappear. So, Tim, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, or maybe just a ballpark figure. How many applications have we received during the moratorium that are pending in some state or another that would be delayed another few months based on if we were to pass this motion as presented?
I think I might bounce this to Leslie, but I know that there's been a couple, if not a handful of inquiries about locating in Bloomington, and top of mind is where are we at with the moratorium. But Leslie?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Knights of Columbus has been one, which is, I'll mess up the name, but their DBA is Knights of Columbus. They're the one that has been the most actively asking about the moratorium. We have not, or the department has not been accepting applications during the moratorium, so that also kind of puts a rough idea on the number. This last 2 weeks, we've had more increased phone calls with interest of what council action will do. Today, I did receive in an unmarked envelope a drop-off of Knights of Columbus application done on the previous application that we had. So we have a file that has been posted as of today, but none pending other than that.
Okay. Yeah, and just as as liquor commissioner, I would say the number of people who have asked about it, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes out of direct self-interest, has increased over the past 2 months or so. Knights of Columbus have been, of course, they're also, and then this ordinance could, depending on, that could be another amendment to exempt nonprofits, but that's a whole other story. So the Knights of Columbus are, for a variety of reasons, they argue that they kind of got slipped through the cracks, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And there are some people who want to open new, want liquor licenses and would like to have video poker.
Right.
There are people who want new liquor licenses. Mostly, they don't want video poker. We do have several restaurants that are coming up. They want liquor licenses. They don't want video poker in their establishments. It's a different type of establishment. And we are also, just FYI, in the process, we do have some situations where we have a couple of establishments that may not be living up to their, and thank you, Alderwoman Howman. I did go there myself. The police went to the particular establishment you're talking about. So we're monitoring this to be sure that the ordinance is being followed, even as it exists currently, even with the moratorium. So I just wanted to give you that update as liquor commissioner, because we're in constant contact. But I think you're right. You're going to hear about them. You hear about some that people come in. I'll hear about them, as liquor commissioner, or through George, because they'll contact either me or George Boyle. No. Sorry.
So I guess to be fair, to summarize, there's at least one serious one, but no more than a half dozen additional pending applications or some interest that's been shown at this point in time?
Yeah, we have one filed as of today.
Okay.
There's no other pending, and we receive a couple of phone calls weekly. Some of them just new business ideas, opportunities.
Right, and that's
no
not-
one who's actively submitted except
Gotcha.
tonight.
Thank you, Leslie. And the reason I asked that question is I've heard the Knights of Columbus story, and I'm sympathetic to what's going on in that situation. And I just as a policy standpoint, I don't want to make decisions based off of one organization, but I think we should provide some clarity to the community. And in my opinion, this should be wrapped up as quickly as possible. And I hear the comments about the state of Illinois. If there's one thing I've learned, the state of Illinois will always disappoint me, and I'd be shocked if we would get any answers about those big pieces over the next 6 months, 12 months. I mean, to me, I think it'd be at least 2 years before anything major like that happens, but my crystal ball is as good as anybody's. So I think we need to resolve this sooner than later, so I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleagues think.
I would echo that, with one exception, when we got the $250,000 for the Route 66 Visitor Center. Other than that, I would agree. Alderwoman Howman and Schmidt, we'll start on this side.
Thanks. And I kind of speaking off the cuff because I hadn't heard your proposal until just a few minutes ago, obviously. And to what Scott's saying, who knows how long it'll take the state to do whatever they're going to do. About, they're talking about imposing a video gaming terminal fee. Who knows if that'll happen. I would prefer that we keep with the April 9th, because of the state being an unknown, and also I think we should I don't know that we should put this on the new council coming in, just because we've been living with it for, at least we've all lived, 2 years at least. Some of you have been living with it for longer than that. And so to lose the institutional knowledge that we know we're going to lose with 3 of us going off council in end of April, I think we should keep to the April 9 date.
Okay. Just to clarify, unlike some other communities, and including Normal, we are not supposed to have video poker establishments that only do video poker. And that's, I did not make that clear earlier. That's why there's, in one particular location, some intense scrutiny of their receipts, et cetera. I'm sorry. You cannot have a majority of your receipts come from video poker in the city of Bloomington. That's not the case in other communities. And so, again, we have this one particular establishment that we're working on. And Alderwoman Schmidt.
Thank you. I think I'm echoing the concerns I heard from my colleagues here. I was interested in knowing more about how you arrived at September, and whether you really felt that these issues would be resolved, because I actually see businesses left in limbo, and that makes me uncomfortable.
Thank you for asking that. And, as we began our conversation about what next with these video gaming terminals, some of the things that resonated with me in particular was the disparity among our communities here in Bloomington Normal of the presence of these machines. Currently, Bloomington has 258-ish, 258, and Normal has 66. Now, why is that? And what is the impact on our community, our city, as compared to our neighbors just to the north? And what's the driving force? Why is this unfolding? I'd like to know more about that. I'd like to study that. Jason Berkman happens to be my constituent. He has sponsored a bill on cannabis, and I've spoken with him. I've attended his presentation, as many of you have, and they're moving fast with this. They've advised us this is going to happen this spring. So I want to give them an opportunity to do that and see what that bill looks like. Where will that recreational use be sanctioned, and will it be a part of public spaces or private spaces at the end of the day. So I have to know what that looks like. So I'd like us just to be able to take a pause, see what Springfield does, but also let's look at ourselves and let's look at our local community and what's happening in relation to the emergence of these parlors and these games. So you asked me why September 1, because I'd like to have an opportunity for that session to be over, so that'll be over at the end, let's say, I don't know when signing down
May, yeah.
will occur. So
May.
we'll have that, and then we'll have an opportunity to study what they've done and see what, if any, impacts there'll be there. And then, perhaps we'll have our next iteration ready to go, and we'll launch it July 1st. But I want to give us some space to create our next ordinance and our next philosophy and get it right, because it's important.
Thank you. And I wish, as liquor commissioner, I wish I could give you the exact comparative data. We did do this a few years ago when last time we had proposed putting fees on this. I don't have it, but I'm sure we can, staff and others, George probably has his fingertips, or Commissioner Jordan probably has it memorized. And we can certainly get that information, to you, the council, and the public, on the comparative impact. Alderwoman Schmidt.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what Alderman Bray has said. It seems to me that we have some short-term issues and some longer-term issues, and I'm debating about that short-term impact on businesses. What happens if a business decides it closes? We raised a number of questions, I think, the last time we met about differential fees, about whether we're putting a cap on the number of licenses that we would allow for gaming terminals. That seemed to me to be very short-term things that could continue to provide some guidance to both our businesses and to the Liquor Commission. The questions you raise are really important ones. I don't know whether September is even a reasonable time for the state to figure all that out. I see the issue here, but I'm not sure about agreeing about September.
Okay. Just a quick comment then before actually, Alderman Milwaukee, excuse me. I'll be very brief. Now Alderman Sage. One of the things that I think is an impact generally on a moratorium is that it does tend to give, and I don't think I said anything a year ago because I think there was a lot of good reason to see what it might do. But one of the impacts is that obviously it gives a monopoly to the people, pseudo-monopoly of those who currently have the machines. Now that could be good or bad, depending on your vantage point. But that's one of the issues with respect to extending a moratorium for at least a longer period of time. There may be some economic development issues, but I think that's probably the main one. I will shut up and go to Alderman Milwaukee and then Alderman Sage.
Okay, I'm not going to tell you to shut up.
Oh, I've been told worse.
So I think initially when we talked about an April date, I think I remember asking the staff if they thought they would be ready, because I thought it was a kind of an aggressive timeline. I personally, my approach is that I'm a very patient person, so I tend to prefer taking a little bit more time. I feel like we get better policy as a result of it. And again, alluding to, I guess Alderwoman Schmidt was channeling my thoughts because I remember last time we talked about a number of things. How we would award licenses. I think Alderman Blagg even brought up whether or not we wanted to auction those licenses, if we wanted to have differential prices for different organizations, and which organizations we would allow to have these licenses. So to me, that brought up a number of questions that I think it would we would be best served to take a little bit more time. You know, there were a lot of unanswered questions that I didn't think could be answered in 1 month or so, that we would impose a moratorium or add to it. So for that reason, I'm more in favor of extending it for some additional period of time. September 1st, I'm fine with it, and then we can, at that point, we can make a better decision, in my opinion.
On that, someone could conceivably apply for a variance or ask us, or no. Are you saying no, that they can't, or am I incorrect? They cannot. Okay, all right, I misunderstood. Thank you for correcting me. Alderman Sage.
Thanks. And yeah, I think I'm inclined to echo some parts of what Mboka said. I mean, the state's going to move fast on this, right? You have legislative sponsorship. These were specific budget talking points in the governor's, message. I mean, this is the biggest pot of gold since Salado came along, right? They're going to move fast on this, right? I mean, the trucks don't drive through town often with money, flying out the back like this. The state's going to move fast on this. And so what I hear you saying, Kim, or at least how I'm interpreting what you're saying, is that what does this do to the nature of the city, right? If you have legalized pot, if you have legalized gambling in addition to video gaming, how does that change the character, the essence, the quality of life here? That seems worthy of some additional study and reflection to me. So, appreciate all the other comments that I've heard. So, thank you.
Again, I think Alderman Sage raises a great point, but just to clarify, at least according to Brad Cole from the Illinois Municipal League, who's executive director, and then Jason Bierrichman, who was asked this question at a presentation, my memory's going to be really bad, sometime around December or so, a couple months ago, that the likely passage would include an ability of home rule communities to opt out, or to say that we don't want it legal, or if they make it legal in public, we don't have to. So just FYI, that doesn't solve anything, but we would have, presumably, as home rule communities, we would have options. Whether that means we extend a moratorium, it is probably irrelevant to that particular point, but I did just want to give that as some background information. We can always add restrictions. We can always change things. Alderwoman Bray, excuse me.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, Mayor, because while that's the plan, based on the discussions and the presentations that we've attended, and when it goes into legislative session, who knows what comes out, right? The sausage occurs, and then out comes the product. So we don't know what we'll get at the other end, right? So we're hoping for opt-out. At least we'll then have opportunity to visit about that particular item in our community, but we don't know where it will go. So thank you, though.
My point on that was, assuming they give us an option, if they're, I don't know that there'd be legalized pot in public, but if it were legalized in public rather than your private home, presumably we'd have the opportunity to opt out of that, but maybe not, as you're saying. It hasn't passed yet.
Yeah.
We do know it'll pass presumably by May. In fact, I've been told probably even sooner than that. I think, as Alderman Sage said, I forgot how colorful he was in putting it, but essentially there's this, the equivalent of a pot of gold out there, and the state is not going to miss any opportunity to latch onto this. Okay, other questions? All right. Okay, now we will vote on the motion. Oh, I'm sorry.
For clarity's sake, the motion is to approve the ordinance extending the moratorium, but with a date of September 1, 2018.
April 9th. If this motion were to pass, that's the date. If this motion were not to pass, another date or the original motion could be in order to continue the moratorium. It doesn't mean you're pro or anti or moratorium. It just means that specific date. Is that?
Well, I guess my understanding of the motion is it's to approve the ordinance, but with that September 1 date.
September 1. Yeah, I'm just suggesting if it did not.
Another motion for another date.
Could be in order. Okay. All right. If everyone will go ahead and vote, please. Okay. The motion passes 5-4. There are 4 nays to announce, Madam Clerk.
Alderman Burgess, Alderman Schmidt, Alderman Black, Alderman Hammond.
Okay. The motion carries, so the moratorium will continue through September 1st. Okay. Thank you. And we move right along then to a city manager's discussion, and I will turn it over to Mr. Gleason.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Scott, do we have any events? Is he? There we go. Events for the next couple of weeks, but also I want to highlight that Chief Wheeler is going to have his bi-monthly conversation with the community. That's going to be over at the police department, the Osborne Room on, is it Wednesday, Chief, the 27th? 27th from 5 to 7? 5:30 to 6:30. And definitely would like the community to turn out for that event. And then also on March 11th, we discussed this last week, but just sharing that the Bloomington Police Department is going to have its annual crime stats and formally present that to council and the community on March 11th. And now we're going to have Scott Rathbun come up. This is the monthly financial report. Realize that we spoke quite a bit about FY20, but this is slightly different. You know, these numbers definitely feed into the 20 discussion.
I've been up here long enough tonight, so we'll keep this kind of short. No material changes from last time, although I want to highlight on the title page here, the section at the bottom, this summary and the monthly budget reports can be found at these locations. This has come up frequently, so we worked out today to make sure we know exactly where these are going. So 2 different ways of navigating to those reports: government transparency, view budget monthly reports, or the documents, finance documents budget, monthly budget and finance director reports. So trying to use the same naming conventions for the files so that the detail report and the director's presentation, which is the summary version of that, will be side by side. So when someone navigates to those sections of the website, you'll be able to look at both reports, the detail or just get the highlights. Major revenues, I was just going to highlight the local use tax. I mentioned that during the proposed budget presentation. You can see that just through January, we're $200,000 ahead of budget year to date. Well, excuse me, the year-to-date budget, because for this particular one, we use seasonality in these taxes. So the year-to-date budget, we're $200,000 ahead of that. When we originally got some statistics from the state related to their projections, we were projecting between $150,000 and $200,000 for the city. Now, all of this might not be related to internet sales, but I'm thinking probably a good proportion of it is. So we're already, I think, exceeding those initial assumptions. The state income statement. I'm going to just bring your attention right down here. There's a lot of discussion about the fund balance. This is showing the ending fund balance for 2018, the $19.2 million that I referred to. The budgetary fund balance. That does not include restricted funds, such as the BCPA funds, the $5 million related to utility tax for the pensions. Those are restricted, so that the entire fund balance for the general fund is $26 million. During the year, you can see, our current favorable, unfavorable activity is nearly $5 million, but that is just a timing situation. We're going to be accruing the revenues at the end of the year that hit in June, July, so that will true up. The projection, the budget adjustment column, this is where we're adjusting, just kind of a recap here, the revised budget numbers to get to our projected. So we're currently projecting a $1.6 million surplus for the year. Dialing up and down, snow and ice, those budgets are over budget right now, but we're having some movement in some other ones, so we'll start truing up some of these categories. But the $1.6 million, that's incorporated into the proposed budget books, so we're in sync there. in anticipation of the fund balance that I projected during that presentation of the 20-plus million. Moving fast. Any questions? The enterprise funds, typically, I'd just like to highlight the bottom revenue trend. You know, the trend that we're at right now is 75% of the budget should be complete. Water is consumption-based, sewer, same thing. But this just goes to show, if you look at sewer, storm, solid waste, specifically solid waste, I'm a broken record on this one, but what the council did last year with the fee increases and the expense reductions, I mean, the fee increase is holding true here, 75% target, we're at 77%. No big migration from the larger container sizes down to the smaller ones that we left flat for the year, for the coming year. So that's a good indication that the projections are holding true. Golf is under from the prior year, but this time of year that's a difficult assumption. I don't know if we had better weather a year ago in late fall and early spring. We certainly have not had good weather so far this year. I'm wrapping up quickly, so any questions?
Questions have been wrapped.
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you so much. Appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Gleason. Is there anything else? Okay. I'd just like to, again, thank Chief Wheeler for having this the presentation that kind of gives it a bird's eye view of what's going on rather than a rumor mill about crime. Obviously, crime of any form is obviously very serious, and especially to the victims. But we want to get an idea of whether or not, most of our crime is down. What do those statistics look like, and what are we doing about it? And thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And I want to thank Mayor Pro Tem Karen Schmidt for handling my open house on Friday. I had a speech that I was to give in Eureka College. Long story, but thank you so much. I was only out of town for a little while. Anyway, I didn't take pictures. It was dark. But anyway, I mean, taking pictures, I'm joking about Eureka College and the immediate area. So thank you so much. I appreciate your handling that.
Sure.
Thank you. Any aldermanic comments? Alderwoman Bray, excuse me, not Bray, Alderwoman Howman.
I'm the gray-haired woman. She's the blonde. Just a reminder, unfortunately I'm conflicting with Chief Wheeler's forum, but I have a town hall planned for Wednesday, the 27th, from 5:15 to 6:45 at the Chamber of Commerce, their share space facility, and this will undoubtedly be my last.
Thank you very much, and thanks for doing that, Alderwoman Howman. Anyone else? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderwoman Schmidt, second by Alderman Black. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.